All right, welcome to week 4 of our Bible reading plan. I pray that things are going well for you guys as you dig into the Word of God. And as we dig this week into Matthew 14 through 18, there are some really fun things that are in there that we want to look at in the text. The first is we end up in that feeding of the 5,000, and that's a wonderful miracle just to see Jesus feed 5,000 aside from women and men, women and children. But then there's this one thing that pops out there, and he had compassion on them. Now, we can get emotive about that, but remember what we saw last week, that Jesus criticized the Pharisees for not having compassion, for being sticklers about their rules. So Jesus has compassion on them. You go down to chapter 15, there's this whole incident where they wash hands. The disciples get criticized because they don't wash their hands. They're breaking the tradition. And Jesus just sort of goes at the heart here, and he says, your problem is that you set aside God's law for the sake of your traditions. You've become a rules-based kind of, this is what we do, this is how things work. And that ultimately gets to the next part where he says, it's a demonstration of your heart, right? Out of the overflow of the heart, this is what we're seeing. So in a roundabout way, he's pointing back saying, look, if you're breaking the tradition where someone should take care of their parents, but now I'll just give it to God, or whatever, you're breaking that law of God. There's a heart problem that's going on here, and it's manifesting itself in a couple of ways. And he feeds the 4,000, and again, we find the same phrase, he had compassion on them. So there's this juxtaposition, this contrast, Jesus and his compassion and his grace, and the hardness and the lack of compassion from the religious leaders there. Chapter 16, wonderful chapter, because then you get into, we find Peter's confession that Jesus is the Christ. But I love how this happened. Jesus immediately goes into, okay, I'm going to die. And then here's what it means to follow me. And the really kind of the driving point here is, yes, you understand part of what it means for me to be the Christ, Peter, but you need to understand I am the suffering Christ here. So he's kind of changing the dynamic there. He's going to kind of put this in a new kind of light for Peter, because Peter's thinking, look, I've seen you do all these great things, but he hasn't really grappled with the death of the Messiah coming up. Then in chapter 17, we get the transfiguration. Jesus is, we see Jesus and it's just part of his glory, not full on all of his glory and majesty there. It's beautiful. And we start seeing, okay, yes, these two things come together. The Jesus of glory and the Jesus of the cross are wedded together inseparably. And then finally, there in the end part of Matthew, we get discourse number 4, the fourth discourse and major discourse in the Gospel of Matthew. And it focuses around the kingdom. It starts with, let's talk about a place in the kingdom. Hey, humility in the kingdom is key. We want to do that. We want to see that when they're jockeying for places. But then we see God's grace and God's compassion on display as he comes, and we read this, he leaves the 99 and seeks after the one. He seeks after them. He does this. But then we get this interesting thing in these two parallel aspects. We think there's a reflection on how we display that same grace. And the one we see in chapter 18 there is that we see God seeks after us, then we seek after one another in discipline, that we go to one another when we have those issues, when someone is wandering away, when someone is far from God. We go and then we take some with us, and we even take it to the church, seeking after them. And then ultimately we also mirror God's grace in his forgiveness. That's where you get Peter. How many times? Oh, forgive and forgive and forgive, because we're never going to forgive someone as much as God in Christ has forgiven us. So those are kind of there's a lot that's coming together there in the this portion of Matthew. But also, let's just hop over real quick to Psalm 18, 19, 20. Psalm 18 is one of those that's going to blow your socks off. God in all of his glory is our refuge, right? Think about this. Like, life is hard. There's so many ways, but it's just our God is a rock. So he's the one we cling to. And yet you see just the creation just undone at his majesty. Psalm 19, we see God's glory is displayed in creation. But then there's this interesting thing. Like, you look at the first part of 19, God's glory displayed in creation, but then God's glory displayed in His Word, in His law. And so it calls us back to the Word of God there in Psalm 19. And then verse 20, just come down to verse 7. I will make my boast in the Lord. I'll boast in the name of the Lord. That's sort of where those three are just kind of pulling together. Those that God is glorious. God is glorious. He's our rock. God is glorious in His in creation displayed and in His Word. But in the end of it, our boast is in the name of the Lord. So I just want to encourage you. There's so many good things there in the text. Share what you're seeing. Is there something that popped out to you maybe you've never seen before? Just sort of drop there in the comments or in there, and I'd love to hear what you're doing. Have a great week. Praying for you as you read. All right. See you soon.